Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me? Yes. Okay. It's first of the month again, so we have birthdays. People born in October are known to be nonchalant, observant, and trustworthy. This month's birthdays are Brian Porter was just a couple days ago, I'm sorry. Emma Porter, Carrie Cool, Kathy Arney, and is there anybody that that I don't know about that I've missed?
Nelson's birthday was Saturday, yesterday.
Right. Lynn's birthday's this month too. Is that it? I'd like to say that the 25th of this month would have been my husband's 96th birthday. Okay, just a couple announcements. Oh, speaking of birthdays, Valerie Lambert has asked me to get more people's birthdays, just the month and the date. So especially our newer members, so I could give them to her so we have a list of all the birthdays. And a reminder that book group will be meeting this week instead of next week because of the rummage sale, which is the 15th and 16th. Welcome to the service of the First Unitarian Church of Hobart, Indiana. My name is Barb Lango, and I serve this church on the board, on membership committee, and FIA. We are a religious community of people with diverse beliefs and shared values. Our diverse beliefs are expressed in our 6 sources, and our shared values are expressed in our 7 principles, both of which can be found online at uua.org. Together, we strive to grow spiritually, build community, and live our values in the world. We are currently in search for a full-time minister. When we do not have a minister in the pulpit, we invite members or guests to share a special message with us. This is one such Sunday. We are fortunate enough to hear today from book group members, readers, Sandy Waters and Cindy O'Day. We are currently streaming our service online. The joys and sorrows portion of our service is, however, private, and we will take a break from streaming during that part of the service. The sermon portion of the service will be recorded and will be available for future viewing on Facebook, YouTube, and the church website. Due to the increase in COVID-19 cases and the more infectious Delta variant, we ask that all in-person attendees of the service please wear a mask covering both nose and mouth. You can either bring a mask or we will provide one. We thank you for your consideration of our community's health and safety. Please take a deep breath now and join us in the spirit of reverence as we listen to our prelude. The opening words today are from my favorite author. It's just a one-sentence quote. There's a couple of you here that know who it is. My friends, longtime friends and family have often laughed about this because I'm obsessed with this man. I'll read his books, but I won't watch his movies. The author is Stephen King. And the quote is, "When all else fails, go to the library." Okay. Book club reader Carla Banks will be lighting the chalice and extinguishing the chalice today. Please rise and stand if you are able for hymn 288. Please remain standing and join me now in our affirmation of faith. The words are printed on the laminated handouts in your pew. Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest for truth is its sacrament. The service is its prayer. And this is our covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. We are striving to create a worship space in which is both spiritual and safe. However, we recognize that not everyone can attend in person. We extend a special welcome to anyone who is joining us virtually today. And thank you for our tech team for making this live streaming and recording possible. Due to the increase in COVID-19 cases and the more infectious Delta variant, please greet your neighbors contactless. Please take a moment to greet your neighbor by waving your hands or letting your smile reach past your mask to your eyes. Now it's time for our children's story. If anybody would like to join me. It's a book. No, it's a book. It's a mouse. It's a jackass. It's a monkey. What do you have there? It's a book. How do you scroll down? I don't. I turn the page. It's a book. Do you blog with it? No, it's a book. Where's your mouse? Can you make the characters fight? Nope. Book. Can it text? No. Tweet? No. Wi-Fi? No. Can it do this? Do, 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 do. No. It's a book. Look. So he gives the book to the jackass. And the jackass starts reading. Arr, nodded Long John Silver. We're in agreement then. He unsheathed his broad cutlass, laughing a maniacal laugh. Ha, ha, ha. Jim was petrified. The end was upon him. Then in the distance, a ship, a wide smile, played across the lad's face. Too many letters. I'll fix it. So, what else can this book do? Does it need a password? No. Need a screen name? No, it's a book. So the jackass got into the book, and he's reading, and he's reading, and he's reading, and he's reading, time for hours. Are you going to give my book back? No. Fine. I'm going to the library. Don't worry, I'll charge it up when I'm done. You don't have to. It's a book, jackass. Now it's time for our joys and sorrows. We believe that a joy shared is magnified and a sorrow shared is diminished. Your joys and sorrows will not be streamed online, nor will it be made part of the recording, which is public. Due to COVID, we will not be passing the microphone. Please speak loudly when you share your joys and concerns. If you can't hear, please let me know and I'll try to rephrase it. Anybody? Carla? and hold them in our hearts, including those too tender to share. Now I'd like to introduce our two speakers. Book club reader Sandy Waters will be first, followed by Cindy O'Day.
I want everybody to appreciate the fact that I'm wearing a banned books mask. Okay. I thought this was going to be a really easy topic for me because books have pretty much been my entire life. I can remember the first book I read. I can remember pretty much every book I've read since then, and there have been quite a few. But I love to read, and so doing this service, participating in it is really special to me, and a tiny bit scary. Over the past week, the American Library Association celebrated the freedom to read during Banned Books Week. If you participated in First Hour, you saw the poster board that I decorated with the titles of banned books and the names of authors who were banned by and imprisoned by, and whose books were burned by the Nazis. As a bonus, I included the names of authors who made the Catholic Church Index Librorum Prohibitorum, list of prohibited books. The Catholic Church wisely discontinued this list in 1966, but not before they imprisoned, excommunicated, and executed more than a few writers of prohibited books in the preceding 300 years. Why were all these books banned or challenged or burned? And why were these authors' lives and livelihoods threatened? The simple answer is that there was something somewhere that someone perceived as a threat. There were words and stories and propositions that challenged their beliefs or the coziness or blindness in which they preferred to live their lives and govern the lives of others. The works of these authors are usually difficult. They're not beach reads. They're assigned in high school English classes because they open up new worlds to young people, stretch their minds, teach them to ask the question, what if? But there are people who don't want their children or themselves to be challenged, to push the envelope, to walk in different shoes, to seek answers to important questions. When I first came to this church, I was looking for a place for spiritual education for my two children. I wasn't sure how I would fit in to the church community. But it didn't take long for me to find a group of mostly women who met monthly in the basement to discuss a book they had all read. For those of you who have been here a while, you'll recognize the names of some of the stalwarts: Dottie Harkin, Dottie Stewart, Doris Miller, Carol Sullivan. Somewhere along the way, we adopted the name Common Readers after Virginia Woolf's collection of essays of the same name. And if my library wasn't currently in boxes and bins and stacked in a closet, I might have been able to find a common reader and quote a brilliant passage. But as our Hoosier band author says in Slaughterhouse-Five, so it goes. Our discussions were always lively and engaging. We never read beach reads, and several of the books on the poster in the parish hall were picks of the month. And we still meet every month, every second Wednesday of the month, except for this week, we're meeting on the first Wednesday. These are women, mostly, I think pretty much all the time, just women, but we have wonderful discussions about the books that we read. We don't always agree, and we try to rank them between 1 and 10. And sometimes there's like a 2 or 3 in there, and occasionally an 8, but we have a lot of fun, and we learn a lot, not just from the books, but from the way we approach the books and the way we talk about them. I was lucky, very, very lucky to grow up in a house with lots of books. Both of my parents were readers, and I learned to read at an early age. My favorite day of the week at the little country school I attended was the day the bookmobile came. And my favorite place in town when I could get there was Cook Memorial Library. At that time, the library was housed in a 3-story mansion that had been donated along with its grounds by Ansel Brainerd Cook to serve the town as a library and park. It was an incredibly neat place to be. Creaking stairs and beautifully wrought wooden shelves and tables and chairs placed throughout for readers and little nooks and crannies where you could hide away. From an early age, I read difficult and challenging books. I never remember either of my parents forbidding any reading material. The one time a nosy librarian called my mother to ask if I could borrow a particular book, she was told by my mother, as she sniffingly said, that I was mature enough to read the book. I'd love to be able to say that the book in question was War and Peace, or the collected essays of Ralph Waldo Emerson, but it was Peyton Place. And I was 12. I decided pretty early on that literature and languages were the topics I was most interested in, and except for a few instances of lapsed standards of taste or intellectual laziness, Valley of the Dolls and Jaws come to mind, I found my greatest enjoyment in books that challenged me, that demanded my full attention. The best teachers were the ones who took the time to analyze a text and ask hard questions. Questions not designed to see if you had actually read the story, or the poem, or the novel, but questions that burrowed deep into your relationship with, your reading of the book. I fell in love with words and the authors who could variously string them like pearls on a necklace or sculpt them from stone. And these authors who could create vital characters that seemed to step off the page, and those who created towns and city neighborhoods that I could feel at home in or be thankful with I never had to visit, and those who dealt with questions of morals and ethics and the upheavals in the lives of their characters, and those authors who made me want to finish the book so I could read it again and again. The best books are those that demand a rereading, whose texts are underlined and annotated in the margin, and I'm always amazed when I reread a book and find a passage that I missed. As an undergraduate, I took a graduate-level course in the modern British novel. E.M. Forster, D.H. Lawrence, Virginia Woolf, and James Joyce. The professor was wonderful, but when I looked at the syllabus, I was more than a little concerned that we would be actually reading all of Ulysses. There was a copy of Ulysses in my parents' library, but I was fairly certain it had never been read. I knew the history of the prosecution for obscenity, and that thanks to the 1932 ruling by U.S. District Judge John M. Woolsey in the United States versus one book called Ulysses, Ulysses was ruled not pornographic and therefore not obscene. And the ruling was affirmed 2 years later by the Second Circuit Court of Appeals. It wasn't the court case and the alleged obscenity that concerned me. It was the renowned difficulty of the text and the fact that it was a reworking of Homer's Odyssey into one day in the life of Leopold Bloom in Dublin. And I had yet to have read the Odyssey. I knew that I had to remedy that to fully comprehend the structure and the allusions, and I did. But what made the experience of reading Ulysses so life-changing was the professor's understanding of the difficulties and the brilliance of the text. His enthusiasm was contagious, and he turned what could have been an impossible task into one that I relish to this day. And I reread Ulysses, and the second time it was like meeting with an old friend. Another difficult and challenging writer is Nikos Kazantzakis, whose Zorba the Greek and The Last Temptation of Christ were both translated to the screen. Zorba the Greek fared well, but The Last Temptation of Christ, not so much. The screenings, the opening screenings met with a lot of protest. Kazantzakis was a deeply, deeply spiritual person, and his work, both fiction and nonfiction, reflects his search for meaning and his struggles with Greek orthodoxy. There was a serious attempt to excommunicate him. Kazantzakis wrote to the clergy, quote, "You gave me a curse, Holy Fathers, I give you a blessing." May your conscience be as clear as mine, and may you be as moral and religious as I." Close quotes. He was added to the Catholic Church's list of prohibited writers, and when he died, he was buried in unconsecrated ground. But the people of Greece, and particularly of Heraklion on the island of Crete, where Kazantzakis was born, recognized in his writing the truth of their lives and of the lives of their fellow human beings. They saw the richness and depth of his stories and his spiritual writing and knew him for the questioning, compassionate writer he was. He is buried in unconsecrated ground on a high point overlooking the city of Heraklion on the Isle of Crete. His grave is attended daily by a gardener who cares for the lawn surrounding the gravesite and who offers flowers for pilgrims to place on his grave. And the words of the epitaph on his headstone are his words, and they say simply, "I hope for nothing, I fear nothing, I am free." Thank you.
Can everybody hear me? Yes. Right. Thank you, Sandy, for your inspiring words. I always learn so much from you. Good morning, everyone. I have always loved books, reading them, listening to them, collecting them. One of my favorite photos is an old black and white of me, a curly-haired toddler, squatting on the carpet, under the Christmas tree, wrapping paper strewn around, intently looking at a picture book. Don't believe me? Wait for it. Wait for it. How about now? True story. My mom wrote that my first sentence was more of a command. Read the book. I loved drifting off to sleep, listening to her read a book, or even better, create an original story. To this day, I still read a few pages at night before I turn out the lights. As a grade schooler, some of my fondest summer memories were made during afternoons on bookmobile days when my friends and I would ride our bikes to the local elementary school to refresh our supplies. I was so proud when I got a certificate for reading over 100 books the summer after second grade, and I can still remember looking longingly up at the higher shelves and willing myself to grow tall enough to reach the books perched up there. Didn't quite work. But when my husband and I built our house, we consciously chose to put bookshelves in our dining room, figured we would spend more time reading than eating. From my lifelong love of reading, I became an avid collector of quotes. I often find in another's words a better understanding of my own world. A good writer can put together a sentence that stays with me long after I have moved on to the next tale. And if you know me, you know that I don't keep my collection to myself. I enjoy sharing what I believe is the right quote for the right occasion. It's like finding the perfect present for a special someone. When I learned by attending this church that the great Unitarian writer Ralph Waldo Emerson did the same thing, I thought, I am in good company. So I guess it should come as no great surprise that I became a teacher. For 28 years, I taught sophomore English. Because I have a great love of literature, I have enjoyed watching teenagers wake up to the beauty of the written word. Every year, we would read To Kill a Mockingbird, the coming-age story of Scout and Jim Finch, whose father, Atticus, defends a black man accused of raping a white woman in the Depression-era South. On a side note, To Kill a Mockingbird has been one of the most challenged books since its publication in 1960. In the beginning, for its sexual content and language, and these days, not only because of its language and content, but also because of its now more problematic white savior in the character of Atticus Finch. But nevertheless, this is a book I love and love to teach. I have read this novel over 50 times, and every time there is something in the story that speaks to me. And there's one passage that I want to share with you today. This scene is not in the movie, and as great as the movie is, and it is great, it is not the book. It's when Scout goes to school for the first time, and she meets her teacher, Miss Caroline, fresh out of college, and as the author Harper Lee describes her, looking and smelling like a peppermint drop. We learn that Miss Caroline is not from the area and therefore does not know these people and their ways. She makes a series of rookie mistakes her first day. However, in my opinion, Miss Caroline's biggest error is in her attitude toward Scout, because Scout comes to school having committed a cardinal sin in her teacher's eyes. Scout already knows how to read and write. She knows how to write because the family maid, Calpurnia, has taught Scout in order to keep her occupied while Calpurnia is cooking dinner. She knows how to read from time spent on her father's lap after dinner, following along as Atticus read the newspaper. It is something that Scout takes for granted. She is amazed that there are other kids who begin school without being able to do this. Unfortunately, rather than being impressed, Miss Caroline, in her insecurity, tells Scout not to let her father read to her again, as he is surely doing it wrong. It is at this moment that Scout has an epiphany when she thinks, until I feared losing it, I did not love reading. One does not love breathing. My friends, during these past 19 months, I have on numerous occasions thought about this quote on a global and a personal level. The pandemic has caused us all to lose so many things we once took for granted. From mundane social niceties, like how to greet each other, do we shake hands, hug, bow, wave awkwardly across the room, to invisible but crucial structures that have kept our economy afloat: jobs, federal benefits, housing, medical insurance, to the most profound, our physical and mental health, and even our very lives. And as much as we might all like to believe, COVID is not yet an entry in an old history book high up on a shelf. On a professional level, one of the things I took for granted until the spring of 2020 was the ability to teach literature in a classroom where all the students were in person. In pandemic teaching, I missed the discussions that came from asking thought-provoking questions, engaging reactions. I missed reading parts out loud and hearing the laughter of engaged listeners. I missed sitting next to struggling students, encouraging them to work that much harder to find the answer to a question. I hated trying to connect both with those sitting in the classroom and with those sitting at home, participating or not participating via Zoom, and never really feeling I was reaching either group. Hybrid was hard. Remote was hard. Teaching was something I no longer recognized or understood how to do effectively and safely. That was one of the reasons I retired at the end of this past school year, early. on a personal level. On a personal level. On April the 3rd, 2020, I woke up and noticed that everything was blurry when I looked out of my right eye. In simple terms, I had suffered something like a stroke in the back of my eye. And unfortunately, in my case, even with treatments, the damage was permanent. I mourn the loss of sight that has made reading once so effortless and pleasurable into an act that is a constant source of awareness and effort. One that becomes more fatiguing the longer I try to do it. Instead of having 3 books going at once, I feel pressure to get 1 book read before the next book group gathering. Having a vision loss is another reason I left the teaching profession, especially after a year that was so dependent on sitting in front of a computer. Now, sometimes quotes become almost mantras for me. One I rely on when I'm stressed is a simple phrase, "When in doubt, focus out." I find this quote usually helps me from becoming too self-focused and wallowing in self-pity, or as Atticus would say, to walk a mile in another's shoes, to practice compassion. However, when I would gaze my eyes wide and look out toward the world, I would feel overwhelmed by all the needs. I find myself filled with worry and despair. I worry about variants that may elude our vaccines. I worry about women and girls in Afghanistan who will likely lose freedoms that they have gained over the course of a generation. I worry about women in Texas, Florida, Mississippi, whose reproductive rights are being stripped away. I worry about the challenges to voting rights for people of color in so many states, and I worry about the devastating effects of climate change, well, everywhere. And I don't know how to help. Now, I know that it's not good for me to stay in a state of despair or hopelessness, but these past months have taken a toll on my mental health and worn my resiliency. Given the nature of the pandemic, there were stretches where practices I had put in place for balance and connection for decades were not available, yoga, spirit circle, or were seriously modified, the Buddhist Sangha, connecting with friends, virtual church services. I can say without exaggeration that I felt mentally, physically, spiritually, and emotionally worn out by the end of this past school year. I found myself living in a state of alternating fear, anger, resentment, hopelessness, and despair. And in moments, I began to wonder if this would be my permanent state. Now, there were glimmers of light, even in the darkest times, and I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge our Common Reader book group and Wendy Masters in particular. These women and men were so welcoming, and I looked forward to our monthly in-person gatherings. It is not an exaggeration to say that their friendship has sustained me, and that being part of that group has given me a reason not to stop reading altogether, but to find new ways to engage in an old passion, and I will always be grateful. Since my retirement, I have taken time to solely reestablish practices that have helped me maintain a balance between being grateful for what I have, but mindful about how quickly things can change. I still struggle with how to stay engaged and hopeful, but as so often happens in my life, the right quote comes to help me gain a new perspective. This one might help you too, so I will share it now. Recently, Richard Powers, the author, National Book Award winner, and Pulitzer Prize winner of The Overstory, reframed a known word in a new way: hope. Now, hope to me has always seemed like an airy wishfulness, as in, I hope he calls, or I hope Santa brings me what I want for Christmas. Powers, in speaking of his new book, Bewilderment, said, I would characterize the book itself as a strange mixture of darkness and light. This question of whether it's ultimately hopeful or despairing has everything to do with how we understand the idea of hope. But I do hope. Insofar as hope means a commitment to engage the future as a meaningful pursuit. I do hope, and I strongly believe that this place where we are, that is still so incredible, will provide us with a meaningful place to put all our effort and all our empathy for as long as we can stick around, unquote. Hope, a commitment to engage the future as a meaningful pursuit. And by that definition, I remain hopeful too. I believe that together we, as Unitarians, are uniquely poised to be, as our chalice lighting says, a beacon of hope in an otherwise dark and often uncertain world. And that, my friends, is why I read. Thank you.
Now is the time in our service for the offering. We give to remind ourselves how many gifts we have to offer. We give to remember that we are part of something bigger than ourselves. We give because we believe in music and sacred space. We give with faith that together we have enough. There is an online link on the screen for both one-time and regular donations. You can also contribute in person by putting paper money and loose change in these baskets and cups. The money in the baskets go to the regular operation of the church. The money in the cups goes to our Faith in Action Committee and a different charity chosen by the committee every month. This month's charity, along with next month's, will be family giving for the holidays. I'd like to have two people come up. For your prayers, your presence, your service, and your gifts, we are truly grateful. And now please rise and stand if you are able for our closing hymn, number 301. And now for our closing words. Our Common Book Group fearless leader, Wendy Masters, will share the closing words.
Before I do, I would like to thank Barb. When we were asked to do the service in a very short notice, I thought, okay, here we go again, trying to get volunteers. Barb stepped right up and said, I'd like to organize. And she did. And right along after Barb spoke up, others spoke up. And I want to thank them. This book group has been in existence for 34 years. And we get our books from, and I want to recognize the Lake County Library. They have a wonderful program, book bags. Karen Smith, who isn't here today, is our book bag runner. We choose the books that we want to read. We give the list to Karen. Karen organizes it with the Lake County Library, picks up the books, distributes the books. We keep extras in the office for anyone who wants to read what we're reading for the month. And then gets all the books back to the library so that no one has to take a dime out of their pocket to read a book. So thank you to all the book club members for all of their participation and efforts. Closing words. For some of us, books are as important as almost anything else on earth. What a miracle it is that out of these small, flat ridges, squares of paper, unfolds world after world. Worlds that sing to you, comfort and quiet or excite you. Books to help us understand who we are and how we are to behave. They show us what community and friendship mean. They show us how to live and die. Author Anne Lamont.
A, B, C, D, E, F, G, I never learned to spell, at least not well. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, I never learned to count a great amount. But my busy mind is burning to use what I got. I won't waste any time, I'll strike while the iron is hot. If they ask me, I could write a book about the way you walk and whisper and look. I could write a preface on how we met, so the world would never forget. And the simple secret of life is just to tell them that I love you a lot. Then the world discovers, as my book ends, how to make true lovers from friends.
Thank you, Jeremy. And now Carla will extinguish the flame, or the chalice.
Please join me as we extinguish the chalice. We extinguish
This flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment.
these we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
Thank you for attending First Unitarian Church of Hobart. Please join us now for our in-person coffee hour in the parish hall. If you're attending online, we invite you to carry on your own virtual coffee hour with the others online. Thank you.
I could write a book, Lord of Heart, from
You okay? Be careful.